Ever wish there was like a simple formula for success? I mean, one that didn't involve like stepping on others to get to the top.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to dive into this company that seems to have actually cracked the code.
Okay.
Wetherill Associates,
Uh-huh.
or WAI as they're known. They built this incredibly successful business using something called the right action ethic.
Interesting.
It's all detailed in this book, Leadership of the 21st Century. And honestly, some of the stuff in here is pretty mind-blowing.
It's definitely a thought-provoking approach. From what I've gathered, their headquarters sounds more like a peaceful retreat than a typical, like, high-pressure corporate office.
Right. The book talks about this almost innocent atmosphere, even mentions senior employees, some even in their 70s and 80s, happily answering phones. I mean, where else do you find that kind of serenity in the business world?
It goes back to the company's origins. This wasn't some big shot CEO coming in and imposing their vision. It was founded by this group of people who had spent years studying with Richard Wetherill, the man behind this whole right action ethic.
Oh, interesting.
They were dedicated to these principles from day one.
So what exactly is this magic formula? How does the right action ethic actually work?
Think of it as like a motto.
Okay.
Reality over opinion, collaboration over ambition, good for all over, good for few.
Okay.
Basically, every decision is based on facts, not feelings. Everyone works together instead of competing for personal gain. And the focus is on what benefits everyone involved.
Wow.
The company, customers, suppliers, employees, even the community.
It sounds almost too idealistic. But then the book argues that by focusing on doing the right thing, profit naturally follows, almost like a side effect.
Yeah.
It really challenges that whole like dog eat dog mentality we see so often in business.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so fascinating. It suggests there's another way to succeed, one that doesn't require sacrificing your values or exploiting others. But let's get real for a second. How many of us can honestly say we're always 100% honest? I know I've told my share of white lies. Wetherill is pretty upfront about this, though. He says that even small dishonesties can add up and ultimately harm the common good.
Yeah, he actually categorizes people based on their level of honesty.
Okay.
There are those who benefit from a corrupt system, those who feel stuck in it, those who are indifferent, and then those who actively try to do what's right.
It's like he's describing different personality types you see everywhere.
Right?
Think about that coworker who cuts corners, or the politician who spins the truth.
Yeah.
Where do they fit in Wetherill's categories?
It's a good way to frame it. And what's interesting is that Wetherill doesn't see people as like inherently good or bad, just making choices that fall somewhere on the spectrum of honesty.
So where does WAI fit into all of this?
WAI took this radical approach of honesty into a notoriously cutthroat industry, the automotive aftermarket. Imagine trying to play by the rules when everyone else is cutting corners.
Talk about an uphill battle. Did people think they were crazy?
Absolutely. They faced a lot of skepticism, even ridicule. But they held firm to their principles. No bribes, no shady deals, just honest business practices.
But how do you actually change people's behavior? Surely they couldn't convince everyone to suddenly become saints.
Wetherill talks about two ways to change behavior: force and persuasion.
Okay.
WAI relied heavily on persuasion, particularly leading by example.
Okay.
They figured if they could demonstrate that the right action ethic actually worked, others might follow suit.
That makes sense. But leading by example can only take you so far. What about dealing with difficult people, like those angry customers everyone has to deal with?
They had a unique approach to that as well. They trained their employees to use what they called the battleship technique.
The battleship technique.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing. What is that?
It's a visualization exercise to help detach from anger.
Okay.
Instead of getting pulled in by the emotion, you imagine it as a battleship, like exploding in the distance. You acknowledge its power, but let it wash over you without causing harm.
So you don't suppress the anger, you just observe it.
Right?
I can see how that could be helpful in those heated moments when you're tempted to react defensively.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where this technique could have helped?
I think we've all been there. But WAI didn't stop at just training individuals. They baked this ethical approach into their entire company culture. For example, adhering to the right action ethic was a non-negotiable condition of employment.
So it wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement.
Right.
That's pretty bold.
It was. But think about it. If someone is desperate for a job, especially during tough economic times, they're more likely to be open to a company's way of doing things.
It's like economic necessity becomes a form of persuasion.
Yeah.
But even with the best intentions, conflicts are bound to happen. How did WAI handle disagreements within the company?
They relied on a key distinction that Wetherill made:
Okay.
the difference between technical authority and disciplinary authority. Imagine a sports coach.
Huh.
Technical authority is like correcting a player's technique. It's about facts and objective feedback. Disciplinary authority, on the other hand, is like penalizing a player for breaking team rules. It's about consequences for behavior.
So technical authority is focused on the task, while disciplinary authority is focused on the person.
Exactly. And WAI believed that most workplace conflicts stemmed from blurred lines between these two types of authority.
So instead of getting bogged down in personal drama, they tried to focus on the objective reality of the situation.
Right. They had trained counselors who would step in to mediate conflicts, and their goal was to remove the emotion from the equation and guide everyone back to the facts.
Is there an example of this in the book?
There's a story about two department heads who were at each other's throats over warehouse space. It was getting pretty ugly, but a counselor intervened, and simply by stating the facts of the situation, the square footage each department needed, the overall warehouse capacity, and so on, the tension completely dissipated.
It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Sometimes just bringing the truth to light is enough to resolve a conflict. But Wetherill goes a step further, right? He talks about this concept of brutality that can exist even in seemingly harmless interactions.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We tend to think of brutality as physical violence, but Wetherill expands the definition to include any form of attack, belittling, or humiliation that damages a person's sense of self-worth.
So even subtle things like sarcasm or backhanded compliments can be considered brutal.
Right.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
That's really eye-opening.
He shares this jarring anecdote about a sales meeting where the lowest performer was publicly humiliated in front of the entire team.
Oh gosh.
Can you imagine how demoralizing that would be?
It's the complete opposite of WAI's approach, which was to focus on correcting performance, not the worker. They believed mistakes were opportunities for learning, not punishment.
Right, and this ties back to their emphasis on persuasion over force. They created a culture of respect and support, which encouraged people to own their mistakes and strive to improve.
It seems like this whole right action ethic is about creating a more humane and ethical way of working.
It definitely challenges a lot of conventional wisdom about business and leadership.
This is making me rethink how I handle conflict.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I want to touch on another interesting aspect of WAI's philosophy, their view of leadership as guidance.
Ah, yes. This is where Wetherill really turns traditional leadership on its head. He argues that true leadership isn't about being the person in charge. It's about creating an environment where the right actions can emerge, regardless of who initiates them.
He even prefers the term guidance over leadership to emphasize this point.
Exactly. It's about letting go of the ego's need for control and trusting that the best solution will arise when everyone is aligned with the common good.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's like a whole different way of thinking about success, not just in business, but in life. But we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have. Perhaps we should pick up this thread in part 2 and delve deeper into how this all played out at WAI.
Definitely. There's still so much more to uncover about how they put these principles into practice.
See you in part 2, listeners.
Welcome back, everyone. Last time we were knee-deep in this right action ethic, this radical philosophy that Wetherill Associates built their success on.
Right.
It sounds pretty utopian, but how did it actually work in the trenches of their business?
That's the real test, isn't it? And what's interesting is that many of WAI's leaders came from backgrounds that you wouldn't typically associate with corporate success.
Okay.
Some had personal struggles, others had limited formal training.
That's pretty surprising. We're always told you need a fancy degree and years of experience to climb the corporate ladder.
Right. But WAI seemed to find these diamonds in the rough. The book suggests it was their commitment to the right action ethic that helped them turn their lives around and ultimately lead the company to such remarkable success.
It's like that saying, sometimes the people no one imagines anything of do the things that no one can imagine. Is there a particular story that illustrates this?
One that stands out is Margot Callis. Before she encountered Wetherill's teachings, her life was, let's just say, a bit chaotic. But at WAI, she found a sense of purpose and eventually became the head of human resources.
That's amazing. From chaos to head of HR, all thanks to the right action ethic. I'm starting to see why this philosophy is so compelling.
It goes beyond just professional achievement. It's about personal transformation. WAI seemed to understand that everyone has potential, even those who might have been overlooked by other companies.
So how did this all play out in their day-to-day operations? Did they have specific practices that embodied this philosophy?
Their approach to performance management was a great example. Instead of focusing on punishing mistakes, they emphasized correcting performance.
So no public shaming for messing up. That's refreshing.
Exactly. The book highlights their policy of never embarrassing an employee, even if they made a significant error. They saw mistakes as opportunities for growth and learning. It reminds me of something a mentor once told me. Don't punish the person, correct the problem.
That's a great way to put it. It creates a much safer and more supportive environment. People are more likely to take risks and be honest about their challenges when they know they won't be punished for making mistakes.
Exactly. And when people feel safe, they perform better. It builds trust and accountability, knowing that their contributions are valued.
It's the opposite of that fear-based management style that unfortunately is still so common.
And this ties into another interesting aspect of WAI's approach, their unique way of benchmarking.
Benchmarking. Isn't that all about comparing yourself to the competition, trying to be the best, the fastest, the most profitable?
That's the traditional approach. But WAI took a different route. Instead of comparing themselves to other companies or individuals, they benchmarked against the right action ethic itself.
So their own internal standard of ethical behavior was the yardstick. That's a pretty bold concept.
It is. It's like saying, we're not competing with anyone but ourselves. Our goal is to become the best possible version of ourselves, ethically speaking.
That takes a lot of discipline, especially in a world that's constantly pushing you to compare yourself to others.
It does. But the book suggests that this internal focus helped WAI create a more sustainable path to success. They weren't chasing after external validation or trying to keep up with the Joneses. They were driven by their own internal compass.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's like they replaced the traditional markers of success, profit, market share, competition with a completely different set of values. Integrity, collaboration, and the well-being of everyone involved.
It's a fundamental shift in perspective, and the book even mentions that this focus on right action had a positive impact on the overall well-being of their employees. Stress levels were reportedly lower, and there were fewer instances of serious illness.
That's incredible. It really makes you wonder, what if more companies adopted this approach? Could it lead to a healthier and more fulfilling work experience for everyone?
It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it?
This whole episode has been pretty thought-provoking, but a part of me still wonders if this can work outside the unique bubble of WAI. It's a beautiful story, but is it realistic for the rest of us?
That's a question worth exploring. While WAI's success is undeniably inspiring, we can't ignore the potential challenges of applying these principles in a world that doesn't always play by the same rules. I guess that's something we can discuss further in part 3.
Let's do that. We'll dive into those potential pitfalls and see how WAI managed to navigate those tricky situations. Stay tuned. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Wetherill Associates and their right action ethic. It's been a fascinating journey so far, but I gotta be honest.
Yeah.
The cynic in me still wonders if this approach can survive outside their seemingly perfect bubble. The real world throws some pretty nasty curveballs, right?
You're not wrong to question that. The book acknowledges that putting the right action ethic into practice, it isn't always easy. There will inevitably be situations where it feels counterintuitive,
Yeah.
maybe even disadvantageous in the short term.
So how did WAI handle those moments where sticking to their principles might have cost them something? Did they ever have to, like, bend the rules?
That's where their deep understanding of the philosophy really shines. The right action ethic isn't about blindly following a rigid set of rules. It's more like having a North Star, a commitment to doing what's ultimately best for everyone involved, even when it's tough.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about approaching every situation with integrity and a genuine desire to find the best possible outcome.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult or goes against conventional wisdom. The book emphasizes that true leadership lies from reality and make decisions that align with both your values and the long-term well-being of all stakeholders.
That takes guts. especially when you're under pressure to deliver results. And the easy way out might be to compromise your values.
It does. And that's where trust becomes so crucial. WAI built their success on a foundation of trust, not just with their employees and customers, but also with their suppliers and even their competitors.
I guess when you're consistently operating with integrity, it forces everyone around you to raise their game too.
Precisely. It's like they were saying, this is how we do business. If you want to work with us, these are the standards. It challenged the status quo and invited others to consider a different way of operating.
It's inspiring, but I still have this nagging doubt. Doesn't this approach require a certain amount of faith? Faith that doing the right thing will eventually lead to positive outcomes, even when you can't see how.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The right action ethic isn't just a pragmatic business strategy. It's a philosophy that recognizes a moral dimension to our actions. It acknowledges that our choices have consequences that ripple out far beyond the bottom line.
So it's about understanding that we're all interconnected, that our choices impact others, our communities, even the world at large.
Exactly. And in a world facing complex challenges like climate change and social inequality, this perspective is more relevant than ever. We need leaders who are guided by a strong moral compass, who are willing to make tough decisions for the greater good, even when it's not the easiest or most profitable path.
So WAI's story isn't just a feel-good tale about a company that did well by doing good.
Right.
It's a call to action for all of us to examine our own approach to work, leadership, and even our everyday interactions.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
What would it look like to apply these principles in our own lives? How can we be more conscious of the impact our choices have on others and make decisions that contribute to a more ethical and just world?
That's a powerful question to leave our listeners with. The legacy of WAI isn't just about their business success. It's about the potential for positive change when individuals and organizations commit to a higher purpose, to doing what's right simply because it's the right thing to do.
So as you go about your day, consider this. If you could change just one thing to be more in line with the right action ethic, what would it be? And what impact might that have not just on your life, but on the world around you?
That's a challenge worth pondering, isn't it? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking those right actions.